Hey viewers, Fernando from SkyFi Audio. Today I've got a Sota Sapphire turntable from the 90s. It's quite a complex system, so I thought I'd do a video mostly for the new owner, whoever chooses to buy this thing, but I thought it'd also be interesting for anyone that likes sort of vintage turntables, especially the more complex models. It's quite a performer and rich full of features, so let me dive right in. And I'll start with the sort of overall design intent. So the Sapphire came in a couple different versions over time. They varied by whether or not they had a suction clamping system for the record and whether they use external power supplies or not. And back then you could order this with different sets of Tonearms. There's quite a selection, or you could fit your own. So they sort of would provide a blank arm board as well if you wanted. So this is towards the top of the line, full featured, and it's fitted with a tangential Tonearm from M&N Technologies. It's a super cool tangential air-powered Tonearm, really easy to use and set up. So it's one of our favorite Tonearms in this sort of technology area. It is a fully sprung turntable, and by fully sprung I mean that the platter and Tonearm are sitting on a suspension system. So it's fairly intricate. There's a platter, there's a sub-platter, and then there are 4 springs where the entire turntable sort of hangs upside down, like almost like a bat would in a bat cave. So if I sort of nudge the platter or the Tonearm, you can see them sort of move in unison and take a little bit to settle down, because it's just sprung. It's not dampened in any way like a car would be. It's just hanging from 4 different springs. So this helps in many ways. One, it helps eliminate vibrations that are coming up through the surface, through the table that it sits on. It also helps with footsteps. If you've got sort of an older house or apartment and you like to walk around while records are playing, sometimes a turntable that is not suspended will skip. So this is able to, much like a car suspension, able to absorb a certain amount of floor movement without skipping. So in the sprung turntable world, some manufacturers, suspend the Tonearm, some do the platter, and some do both. Like for example, the Lin LP12 has them both together, and this is very much like that. So you can see that the Tonearm does in fact move with the platter. Now the motor does not move. The motor sits attached to the plinth, but it is connected to the platter through a belt, a rubber belt that can give and is able to make up for the difference, the geometrical difference between as it sort of bounces up and down. So no need in this particular design to spring or suspension mount the motor as well. So as I mentioned, it is in fact a belt drive turntable, and if I were to remove this cover here, you would see a very simple motor here with a motor controller connected to the platter through a belt system. Operation is fairly easy. We've got power on and off buttons up here. It's our toggles, and here's a 33-45 selector, so you can select your speed on the fly, and the ability to dial it in just right. Here's the speed control for each of the 2 speeds with a plus minus for each. Now it does not give you any feedback as to what your speed is, so you're going to need some sort of app, either an app on your phone or some sort of stroboscope to know exactly what your ultimate turntable speed is. But they tend to be sort of set and forget controls where you measure once, you set it, and you rarely have to move it again. As a matter of fact, prior to packing this for our next customer, we will go ahead and set this turntable speed. We have 2 methods of doing it. One is this really cool app on our iPhones called RPM. It's really very precise. We've used it over many, many years. It has a great database and can actually give printouts of your turntable performance. And then we also have a strobe that we use as a backup. So moving on to the rest of the turntable. So this is the M&N Technology Tonearm. Here's the linear bearing. So this is how it tracks as the record plays. There is a pump that is feeding this system through this hose here, which provides the almost frictionless movement of the Tonearm, and that is achieved by inserting air, pumping a thin layer of air between the outer bearing and the inner bearing. So very efficient. We've had a few turntables over the years with this technology, and it's pretty reliable and trouble-free. A couple other adjustments you see here. This is probably the best turntable we've seen to adjust the height of the tone arm. It's super nice. It's just utilizing this lever right here that lets you sort of dial in the overall height of the tone arm. And we try to achieve sort of perpendicular tone arm level with the platter itself. So in this case, we will use a couple different devices to measure and make sure that this is in fact parallel with the record surface. This bar here is to lift and lower the tone arm. It uses a sort of cam device here. If I push down on here, you can see the tone arm raise. So this shaft here is an eccentric shaft. So as I move this, it effectively pushes up and down on this part of the tone arm. Very simple and effective. The arm wand is removable, which is great if you like to sort of move cartridges and try different things. Let's say you've got a moving coil cartridge and a moving magnet. You could purchase 2 of these wands, and they're fairly easy to remove. There's a plug here, electrical plug, and a single screw, and it'll come out and you can replace it with another one. Much better and easier than changing the cartridge itself, and a lot less risky. The case itself is made out of this beautiful dark walnut with finger joints. So top quality on this woodwork, and it's got a really nice sort of aged patina to it. The top is a Formica, black Formica substance. Does a fairly good job at holding up. It doesn't scratch that easily, so we actually like this better than an acrylic surface. The next thing you'll see is that we've got a fairly elaborate record clamp. This record clamp has a sort of gasket material here, and it is cam activated as well. So when you put it on here, it has a locking mechanism. And I'll show you why it's so important to be able to lock this particular record down. See, this is a vacuum platter. You'll notice that on the perimeter there is a seal, a sort of gasket material, very soft and supple gasket material that provides a sealing surface between the record and the platter. And the clamp does 2 things. It holds the record down, and it also seals that area as well, because there is a vacuum system attached to the platter. Underneath, there is a hose coming out of the bearing, the center bearing spindle, that goes to this lower box over here. Now, don't mind or get overwhelmed by the amount of wires. They're actually fairly easy to figure out. But this lower box here that comes with a turntable is a pump, a vacuum pump. So when I turn on the record, it's very hard to see, but if you were to look very, very carefully, it does in fact get sucked down as it begins to spin. And that is a great way to take any warping out of the record. If you've got an old record collection, this is a must, and Mr. Fremer will tell you as well. He won't touch a turntable, or he's much partial to vacuum platters to take out the waviness in records. So as you saw, I use this button here to activate both the motor and the vacuum. If you were to listen very closely as I press the button, you can hear the vacuum go on for about 4 or 5 seconds. That's just enough. That's all you need in order to pull a vacuum on a record. And then it goes into a maintenance mode where it provides a much smaller amount of vacuum, just in case there's any sort of leakage that's happening throughout the system. The top box is essentially a much more upgraded version of the power controller. So the simpler version of the Sapphire would come with just a wall wart, which looks a lot like this. In this version, we've got the actual power supply built into this top box, where we supply power to the whole system. And then the vacuum pump itself plugs into the top outlet. So this is a self-contained unit. Lastly, you'll see that we've got another item here. This is a vacuum pump for the Tonearm. So as I mentioned, the air bearing in here requires a pump. And by the way, I just misspoke. This is not a vacuum, it's the opposite. It's just a regular pump. It's positive pressure. So this provides around 5 psi of pressure to this Tonearm. So that's what allows it to slide so smoothly back and forth. It's fairly quiet. It can sit near the turntable. It won't really offend most but the pickiest audiophiles. I know some people that are super picky and they'll mount this remotely, maybe in a closet and run a long hose. There's really no limitation in how long of a 1/4-inch hose you can run to it. So if you wanted to just run an extension cord and a vacuum hose to it, a pump hose, you certainly could hide that. And as a matter of fact, these two boxes don't have to be anywhere in sight either. This controller has a fairly long, about a 3-meter cord on it. So this is really the only device you would want near the turntable in order to pull the vacuum on the platter itself. Now we've gone ahead and fitted a cartridge on here. We put a brand new Sumiko Blue Point number 2. This is one of our favorite moving coil cartridges. Great performer, around the $500 range. And we thought it'd be a nice match for this turntable. So we just popped one out of our inventory and calibrated it. Since it is a tangential Tonearm, it's a lot easier to calibrate than it is a conventional pivoting Tonearm. So actually it was fairly easy for us. Just got to make sure your geometry is correct between the Tonearm and the center of the record. You've got to make sure it's leveled, and then the azimuth and the alignment of the cartridge has to be perfect. And since there are no grooves on the head shell, it's fairly easy to get that correctly, requiring very little adjustment. And then the tracking force is set using this very simple counterweight here. So fairly easy to set up from a sort of technical point of view. Couple other things is because it is a sprung suspension, there are 4 springs, one in each of the 4 corners. It's important to be applying the same amount of pressure on the left side as the right side of the turntable. The arm, as you can see, adds quite a bit of weight to the right side, so great care is taken through the calibration process to add the necessary weight in order to balance this thing. And there are places within the Sota's bottom and underneath the Tonearm that allows you to add lead weights in order to get this level. Now we're not quite there yet. I think I've got a little too much weight on the right side, so I'm going to remove this Tonearm and take away a few grams of lead shot to try to get it a little bit higher up in the platter. I noticed that before, so I could tell that the right side here is just slightly lower, about 1/8 of an inch or maybe 1/16 of an inch than the right side over there. So this still needs to come up a little bit, just about that much. And I'll do that by removing the weight on this particular side. And it's nice, Sota did provide a nice pocket underneath the arm board that allows you to add and remove weights. I'll give you a different angle so you can see. So this is the hose that goes to the pump that powers the Tonearm. I suspect this will have to get routed probably through here. So you still need to route the pump feed through that hole there. Okay, that's about it. We've got a few of these sapphires. We're big fans of them, so we always grab them when they come up in the market. You can check our website, SkyFiaudio.com, because we have this in a few different configurations. I believe we've got a very similar configuration without the vacuum, but with a less expensive cartridge. And we also have one with a pivoting conventional Tonearm in a light oak. So SkyFiaudio.com. Please subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more of these videos. And thanks for watching.